Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this somewhat Halloween themed event, but really applicable year round. We are thrilled to have with us, absolutely thrilled to have this unique and empowering event with actress and author Rachel True and with our activist astrologer author Mecca Woods. I am so excited to get into this. My name is Angela Januzzi. I work with special programs like this and marketing at bookshop.org. So I'm going to give a little bit of an intro about Bookshop and Bookshop's work, where you can find both of our incredible panelists' books, obviously. And then we'll actually get to our intros of our wonderful authors, and then they'll have a great conversation. And then about 30 minutes in, if you're watching this pre-recorded later, you're gonna not be able to submit questions, obviously, but if you're live, you can submit questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, please. And then of course, we might not be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try our best. I'm going to go away and Mecca's going to be kind of moderating with Rachel the rest of this event. So I'm going to talk about Bookshop for another couple minutes while everyone joins in. And then we'll get to our intros of our wonderful authors, and then I'll hand it over to Mecca and Rachel. So a little bit about Bookshop first. Again, we are recording this. This is going to be on our Bookshop YouTube channel later, so you can check it out there as well. All right. So a word about bookshop.org really quickly first. So Bookshop directly supports independent and local bookstores. We are an online bookstore with the mission to financially support independent and local bookstores because we believe that bookstores are essential to a healthy culture. There where authors connect with readers, where we discover writers, and where children get hooked on a thrill of reading that can last a lifetime. And of course, they're anchors for our downtowns and our communities. So as more and more people buy books online, and even before quarantine happened in 2020, we wanted to create an easy, convenient way for you to get your books and support bookstores at the same time, especially those stores whose e-commerce capacity and or inventory space we at bookshop.org can help supplement. So as a standard, Bookshop always encourages customers to buy books like our authors today directly from your local bookstore when possible. But if for some reason you can't do so, you can come to bookshop.org, find your local store if they're an affiliate with us, or use the map on our website and buy from a stores page on bookshop.org, and they'll get the full profit from your order. If you don't do that, you can also buy your book that will contribute to a general earnings pool that's distributed several times a year, even ones that don't use Bookshop. So those are your ways that your purchase on bookshop.org helps support local independent bookstores. We also support anyone who advocates for bookstore affiliate program, which pays 10% commission to every sale and gives a matching 10% to independent stores as well. So if you're an author or a website or a magazine, you have a book club, if you're anyone who loves books and advocating for books, we are here for you. We want to give back to you if you are promoting books, authors, the life around independent bookstores. So by design, we give away over 75% of our profit margin to stores, publications, authors, and those who make up the thriving and inspirational culture around books. So we do hope that bookshop.org can help strengthen the fragile ecosystem and the margins around book selling and keep local bookstores an integral part of our culture and our communities, especially right now, especially onward in the coming months. Bookshop is a B Corp, a corporation dedicated to public good. So with that, let's introduce our brilliant authors, the reason you're all here today. Rachel True, everyone, is an American actress and the creator of True Heart Intuitive Tarot, out now, and which is on bookshop.org. The work is a tarot deck and a guide. So it has a book as well as a beautiful deck. It combines personal essays with her occultist knowledge to show readers how they too can use tarot as a tool for introspection, self-care, and empowerment. And our speakers today are also probably going to touch on social good and activism as well, and how all these can really support each other. Rachel has appeared in many hit and cult films, including The Craft, which one might say arguably shaped an entire generation, Half Baked, and Nowhere. Rachel's stance is that tarot cards don't predict the future, but rather they suggest possible outcomes based on the reader's present energy. Her beautiful deck and helpful guide will leave you feeling empowered and confident in your choices, again, especially in a year like this. She's a native New Yorker and an avid bibliophile and a lifelong tarot practitioner. She currently lives in Los Angeles. Mecca Woods is a is a New York City-based astrologer, East Coast, West Coast, an author who works to help others create a life that they truly want using their natural born gifts. Mecca's writing and astrology guidance has appeared in places like Bustle, Essence and on TLC. And her book, Astrology for Happiness and Success, is out now. And of course, you can find it on bookshop.org. So thank you both again so much for joining us. I'm going to hand it off to Mecca now. And again, submit your questions. Mecca will be taking them in about 30 minutes in, and then wrap up a little bit less than an hour. So around 8 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. Pacific time. And thank you both again so much for being here. Have a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited. Rachel, like, you know, I can't, like, you can't see it from here, but like I'm having the little butterflies in my stomach because I'm like, oh my God, I get to talk to Rachel True. You know, like
wait, and I'm like, I get to talk to Mecca, because what you guys don't know is I'm a huge fan of Mecca's work.
No, listen, can I tell you about how the craft really like your role, you know, really gave Black girls like permission to be like weird, you know, to be the rebels, you know, to be, you know, to be witch. Like to me, I always consider myself to be a bit of a weirdo myself, which is probably one of the reasons like why I gravitated to astrology. And why I've been able to like embrace astrology and even tarot, you know, and kind of being sort of like having like the outsider sort of knowledge to some degree. Yeah. But you know, like I have, you know, I have a copy of your book, I have the deck, and you know, it's just everything that you've written in it really resonates with me. And I guess, you know, to kind of kick off this conversation, I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what drew you to tarot? Like, when did you have like your aha moment? Like, this is it. This works for me.
Oh, well, first off, good question. And before, I just want to thank Bookshop.org. You know, I want to thank them in the beginning because I've been tweeting and Instagramming about, like, you know, I'm from New York City, where you live, and the Strand and indie bookstores there are going through, all artists, Todos artists, right?
Yeah, right,
are going through a tough time. So I'm so happy to be doing this chat with you, who I'm excited to talk to, but with this organization, Bookshop. So basically what drew me to it, and I'm when I'm tired, my accent comes out when I haven't had enough sleep. So basically when I was, again, I detail this, but when I was a kid, I was in foster care from 0 to 4. And then at 4, we went to live with my dad and his new wife, my stepmom, and they had what I called the library. It was a bookcase. And she taught us to read very young, around 4 or 5. And the 2 books I pulled down were Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, which had a cover very reminiscent of this Tonka in back of me that my father had given me before he passed. So there was that, and the Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Those were the 2 books. Now, I was 4 and a half, 5. I probably wasn't really reading them per se, other than a word here or there, but they both had images and pictures. So cut to a few years later, I'm around 8, and a friend of my parents gives me a tarot deck, or shows me hers first. And it just hit me on a visceral level. I was like, wait, I know this is something I know. I've seen these images. There's something about this that's familiar. I traced it back to those books that I'd always pulled out of the bookcase, and realized that tarot ultimately is a language of symbols, right? And ideas, but symbols, it's a language that I was like, I can learn to speak this. I feel like I already know how to speak this a little bit, but I have studied for decades, you know, of my life, tarot. And one thing I know about tarot is, like, I've studied for decades. I've written a book on it, and yet I will be a student for the rest of my life. And I wonder if you feel that way about astrology, because I feel like with the tarot cards, my understanding of the cards has shifted. How I use them has shifted. And by the way, one last thing I want to say, you can absolutely use tarot cards to kind of figure out what's going on in the future. I don't stress that, though, because there's so many newly minted baby witchlings, and my theory is, let's just learn to walk before we ride our broomstick, okay?
Right.
And by that, I mean, let's open up our intuition. So my guide is about learning that first jump step, you know,
right,
as well as other things. But I think I answered your question in there, didn't I?
Yes. No. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that when we gravitate to things like tarot or astrology, it really does start as sort of like this little like inkling, you know, this intuitive calling, if you will, where you're like, I feel drawn to this. I can't really explain it, but there's something here that keeps, you know, kind of pulling me in. That was the same thing with me in astrology. Like, I had always been into mythology and stories, you know, when I was.
Me too. Mythology is one of the biggest things of my youth.
Yes.
Is reading, but the real myths from back in the day. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, no, absolutely. And it was something about these myths, these stories, like that I either imagined myself in those spaces or I wanted to write them myself. And as a matter of fact, when I was a kid, you know, people would ask me like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would tell them that I wanted to be a writer. And I ended up, you know, manifesting that years and years later. But no, I think what you were saying too, to your point about like the walking before we run, I think that is also a really big point to make because, you know, I've been an astrologer for about 10 years now professionally. And I'm so excited to see like all of these new up and comers like being so excited about this field and wanting to like, you know, jump into it. But I do think what you're saying about like taking your time to do the work, you know, and kind of, you know, getting your bearings first is really important as well. Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think so too, because there's a lot of it. I talk about this in my book a lot, right? Because for me, tarot used for self-reflection is a lot about checking the ego and the ego, the id, keeping it all in, you know, in balance. Because I'm an actor too, right? So I have to
Right.
have a pretty big ego. Yet at the same time, I've got to not believe the hype and the smoke and the things, or the good or the bad. So I'm bringing this up to say that I see a certain amount of excitement, borderline hubris.
Right.
You
Right.
didn't say it,
Right.
I did. But that's kind of again why I was so adamant about pointing out that there's a book in here, not just a deck. Because what I've realized is there's a lot of people who maybe were raised up only on Instagram or YouTube tarot, or Instagram and YouTube astrology. So that's great. You can learn a lot, by the way. I mean, I didn't have that luxury. I had to find the books and the things, you know, there was the internet when I was a kid, but not really like now. So, but I do think what's happened is there are a lot of people out there who maybe don't know the classic meanings of the cards, the classic interpretations, right? Which I've got a page-long interpretation in here. And hopefully it's modernized too, but I like some of the classic, you know, things, because then you can springboard off it. If you know the classic definition, or it's not a definition, it's an interpretation, but if you know that, then it's all about your intuition and adding to that. And I imagine astrology, finding your own path, is a little of the same.
Yeah, to some degree. Well, actually a lot like that, because, you know, with astrology, there's rules, you know, and there's
people are forgetting the rules these days.
Right. Right. Which, you know, it's funny because I always considered myself, you know, to be a bit of a rule breaker. And I take that, you know, from the stories that I read in your book, that you're, you know, pretty much the same way, where it's like,
I was just about to say, rules are made to be broken, people. I'm not like I really believe in shattering the rules.
Right. But I do think there is something to be said for basing your work or basing your knowledge off of a framework, you know, and using that framework to build from. Absolutely.
And just like astrology with tarot, of course, there are many schools of thought, right? So that's what was hard about writing the book, by the way, trying to write up a page-long interpretation and try to satisfy a bunch of different schools of thought. It was challenging, but I'm proud of my work on this. And I come from a school of basically Jungian tarot. Like I said, I was drawn to that Carl Jung book. So Carl Jung says the best way to predict the future, I'm butchering this, but the best way to predict the future is to understand that the present evolved from the past. So a lot of what I talk about in this book, and I think it's not just applicable for beginners, frankly, but it's like anyone who's interested in tarot, there are different ways of approaching it. And like I said, like, for instance, I used to be petrified when I was a young girl, you know, young 18-year-old with tarot cards, and I would get the high priestess. I would be so bummed out about her because she was like all white and buttoned up and, you know, uptight, looking like she was going to hit me. And I just thought of Catholic nuns, me and Catholic nuns. That's true. And that's so far from the truth of that card. My knowledge of that card has obviously expanded many, many times over the years. And what I've learned from her, though, is you don't know what she has on under that robe. You know, you don't know what she's doing. She knows enough to be quiet and not tell everyone her business. So I started to understand that maybe I had some resistance to her when I was younger because I needed to learn to be quiet. Honestly, you know.
No, actually, you know, that you raise a great point. And I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because when, so like the essays that you wrote in your book, there's 22 of them, right? Each for the 22 cards of the major arcana.
Yes.
Which are like the big dogs in tarot. They always correspond or correlate to really big life changes and developments and lessons and things of that nature.
Yeah, like just to jump in, if someone's newish to tarot, the minor arcana are more like the day-to-day things we're dealing with, the minutia of life. But if you get a lot of majors, it means big shifts.
Right, exactly. And you know, I kind of, because I knew that you had these essays in there, I kind of read the guidebook a little bit differently because I know, you know, like we have different, you know, tarot decks and things of that nature, and I know that in a lot of the guidebooks they'll just give you like their interpretation of what each of the cards mean, and you know, you look at them and kind of like go back and forth between the two. But I kind of went about it a little bit differently, and I wanted to look at your essays and your interpretations for the cards that I couldn't grasp. Because there's certain cards, because I think every person might have this kind of situation. I don't know if you experience this as well, but sometimes with the tarot decks, like there's certain cards that no matter how many times I look at them, I'm like, this card just doesn't hit me the way it's supposed to. And the moon card is one of those cards.
Oh,
right?
Interesting. The moon card?
The moon card is one of those cards.
Mecca, like not after writing a book with 78 interpretations. I get them all now. No, but I know what you're saying. There's some cards you're like, how does it relate to me?
Right. And so, you know, I know that like the rough translation of the moon card is like, you know, diving into the depths and the subconscious and, you know, things of that nature. And like for me, what's interesting is that the moon is also associated with water. Especially in astrology as well. The moon is associated with and I have very like the level of water in my chart is very, very low. So I often find myself like when it comes to things like intuition and things like that, or even emotion, I would say more so, I sometimes tend to struggle with that a little bit. And so when I was reading,
what's your chart stacked with?
A lot of fire and air. So a lot
I was thinking fire because you are fiery, but see, I was scared to say it, people, and I'm intuitive, and I was gonna say I don't see so much earth. I'm feeling more fire. Right. Anyway, go ahead.
No. Yeah, I have a little earth. Like my Mercury is in Capricorn, which helps me to write. But I'm very fiery, lots of air. And I'm Aquarius moon. Emotions, I think I intellectualize my emotions all the time.
I talked to a friend who said she's an air sign, and she said, "Oh, Rachel, the difference between us is I feel things, I think things first, and then I filter it down to my feelings." And I'm like, blah, feelings.
Right, the water, right? That Scorpio energy, absolutely. And so when I was reading your interpretation about the moon card, and you know, it really helped me to connect with that when you were talking about like, you know, being a child and, you know, being in bed and dealing with like the night terrors and, you know, using your imagination to whisk you away from, you know, this dark place that you were in, you know, as a child. Like that really helped me to like resonate with the card a bit more because I was able to see myself, you know, in that story, you know. And
good.
Yeah. And that was something too that kept coming up over and over, you know, in terms of like reading, you know, the essays in your book, like especially like the judgment card was another card that I kind of like can't always connect to. And when I was reading your story about dealing with an eating disorder, again, I saw myself in that story because for me, even though I never dealt with an eating disorder, I have had, you know, body image issues, you know, growing up chubby, growing up dark skinned, growing up Black, growing up poor, you know, and kind of being told at a very early age, consciously and also, you know, unconsciously that you're not attractive, you're not, you know, you're not good enough. And seeing that, you know, again, that really helped you know, the card to resonate with me a lot more. And I really appreciate like that approach that you took with the book. Like, was that like your intention in terms of putting the stories in these essays in?
Yeah, I mean, because I didn't think the world was like clamoring for a memoir from me right now, right? Although I get a lot of personal DM questions, you guys, but it seemed like a great way, because I do get so many questions, that a great way to wrap things and give you, because we look through things through our own prism, right? So here's a way to look at this through someone else's thing. And for some of the people may view me, some people don't know me and may read the book and go, huh. Some people may know me from movies and go, oh, I didn't understand. Because as I always say, everyone has a story, right? That you just don't know. Because I got, especially when I was younger and working a lot, people always said, well, you must be to the manner born. And that's why you ... And I just thought, I mean, I'm not going to correct you, because whatever myth you want to create around me is your own doing, right? But ultimately, that had nothing to do with my reality. Without having I don't have an uncle in the business. I don't have a so-and-so, just a poor Black girl too, basically, right?
Yeah.
So I was hoping with those essays that people would be able to see themselves and also see another side of the cards. Because, for example, I write about a great love affair I had when I was very young, or early 20s, under the hangman. You would think it would be under the lovers, wouldn't you? Right? But I chose to put it under the hangman because there are so many intricacies to the cards. And that's why sometimes I don't like seeing them reduced to just a one-word thing, when people are doing readings, because there's so much nuance to a card. And I think writing that essay, instead of putting under the lovers, which is a card which used to be known as a choice, right? A choice to move towards something we love, we desire, we want, doesn't even have to be romantic, just something we love, which was true. I could have put it under there. But in the end, I was, as a young girl, a Victorian lady who didn't really still am, who didn't really like to date people unless I knew, like it was serious. And maybe they had to turn me on with their mind first before I'd even think about letting them touch me. And I also wanted to know there was possibly some future. So in that essay, I talk about like intuitively just knowing like this motherfucker and this guy and I, it's going to be finite. It's going to be finite at best, which makes me uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable in this position. It's going to feel like stasis in a way, because I'm not going to be moving forward towards marriage, But that is why I put it under the hangman, because the hangman is seeing things from a different perspective, thinking outside in a different way, almost turning things upside down, right? And getting subconscious knowledge. So that's what that dynamic felt like, even though it would make more sense to put it under lovers. Now back to the moon essay, I talk about being a little girl and living in my imagination. And those are all the things, though, that prep me to be an actor. Even the story I tell in the moon essay about the Marias, it's really, they're like a little mini craft,
Right. Yeah. I cracked up so much when I read about the Marias. I was like, wow, where
First of all, just between me and the wall, one of my editor was like, well, is it wrong that they're all named Maria? I was like, they were all named Maria. It was a New York City school. What do you want from me? But yeah, putting those stories in there, I hope would personalize it. And Mecca and I were speaking really briefly before we started this, because I'm Gen X, right? And so my stories are going to resonate with a certain kind of maybe Gen X woman, but hopefully younger people as well, because a lot of the struggles that you guys are going through, who are in your 20s and you're like, holy F, this is the world. This is the world I've inherited. A lot of those are very similar to struggles we went through. For example, like every time, honestly, this Supreme Court justice thing is a little hard for me, because as a Black woman who's Gen X age, and all I was taught was, you're gonna have to work twice as hard, which was true, just to get to the same place my white peers are to be, or a little behind where they are, to be honest. But I remember back to Anita Hill, and I was a young woman at that time, and I remember being on, right outside Nell's, actually, which is probably not there anymore. It was a nightclub, and you're sorry you missed it, kids. But walking by Nell's and just going, nobody's going to listen to me. Nobody's going to take me seriously. No one's going to listen to me. They're going to laugh at me and they're going to make fun of me as a Black woman.
You know, I want to ask you about that. I have to ask you this question before we open it up to the Q&A, which will be in a few minutes. So, you know,
I'm sorry, I'm so verbose, Mecca.
No, it's okay. For those of you watching, you know, get your questions ready because we'll be opening up soon.
By the way, I just want to show them quickly. This is my lover's card, and for you art lovers out there, you might be able to tell it's a Hieronymus Bosch painting. So I used inspiration like that in my day, like things that inspired me.
First of all, the artwork I absolutely love, but I did want to ask you this though. I also love the fact that you paid sort of a homage to Miss Pamela Coleman Smith, who is the Black woman artist behind the Rider Waite Smith deck. And I wanted to ask you, you know, when you were writing the book and putting, you know, the deck together, was it sort of like, did you feel yourself paying homage, you know, to Miss Coleman Smith, and did you also feel like there was a need for more Black voices in tarot?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love how you ask that question with a straight face, like you don't know the answer already, Black lady. But I appreciate your professionalism in journalism. No,
Mercury,
the truth.
Mercury cap.
I know. I was like, I need some of her diplomacy. No, it's a great question because the truth is, like, this is a long tradition amongst Black folks, and yet, like a lot of things, like the weed industry, we've been cut out of the dollars and cents aspect of it. And I'm being silly, but not really, right? Because ultimately, when we trace our lineages, which is difficult, but back to Africa, like I watched an amazing documentary by Jaimin Hansu about his homeland, and it's about voodoo. Now, not people don't even know the zombie connotation anymore. I think that's an older connotation, but not voodoo, American Horror Story. No, the religion, the earth-based religion that was voodoo, that yes, did require some sacrifices, much like Catholicism with your bread of Christ, right? So not too much different, but there was all this powerful stuff, magic, if you will, right? Magic of spirit is what I'll call it. And then we came over it. I'm not dogging out religion. I think religion can be a beautiful thing when done correctly. But then we came over and all those old traditions were stripped away. But one thing I do know is in every community when I was growing up, there was always some old Black lady, like, you want to know about yourself, go talk to Mrs. So-and-so, she'll tell you. Or somebody's throwing bones, or we did not go to therapists or doctors quite as often as Black people. So there were community healers, and the community readers or person who had the sight was often the therapist of the neighborhood, in tandem with the preachers and with the church as well. But to talk about Pamela Coleman Smith, which you asked me about, she was the artist. She was, of course, unfortunately cut out of, it was called Rider Waite. Rider was the publisher. They didn't have the artist's name. Smith is part of it. So there was a great book out called Pamela Coleman Smith, where one of my tarot idols, Mary Kay Greer, who has a great blog, by the way, Mary Kay Greer, does as a forward and kind of goes through her very bohemian life. Like, I'd like to think if I was alive back in the day, you know, that I would kind of be a little kooky like her, because imagine being a mixed Black, she's very light skinned, but mixed Black, I think Jamaican and Black woman. Imagine being a set decorator in 1890, whatever, having the freedom, right? Being a sort of a Renaissance person in her own time. So it's super glad to see her getting her due. And yes, when I was working on this deck and pulling artwork and doing things, because Stephanie Singleton, super talented artist who did the drawings from the deck, like I wanted to kind of go brainstorm, but she was in Canada and she was like, she didn't work that way. So basically I would send over a second book to the publisher. You know what I'm saying? I would write my book and pull artwork and send it to her, and then they would send it to the publishers, and we do this whole process. But we have some stunning cards out of it, and I hope they honor Pamela Coleman Smith as well as I could.
Yeah, I have the deck here in front of me, and there's, you know, the vivid colors I love, and I just love, like, here's the Queen of Wands. I just love, like, there's the Death card, which okay, first of all, I love this devil card. The devil card actually is one of my favorite cards in the deck, even though the devil gets pegged as being like this awful energy and, you know, whatever. But
I wrote in my book, right? I kind of understand why you say it's a good, first of all, it's a check on yourself, check your own behavior. But second of all, I write in the high vibe, it's a bacchanalian good time. It is freedom. It is, like I say, for people listening out there, if you live in a tiny small town and maybe you're realizing your sexuality is different than the quote unquote norm of that town, you might get the devil card because you're breaking the chains, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's why I worded my book, by the way. I didn't do upright and reversal because I just don't read that way too. I did, if I get this devil card, what is it in the best sense and the worst sense? And the best sense is fun. You wouldn't want to have 365 though. You're dead.
Right. I mean, no, but you know, I appreciate, like, well, as a Sagittarius, you know, I'm kind of a hedonist myself, and I always considered like the devil to be like the bad bitch card, you know.
Oh, and Capricorn, it represents, first of all, I'm Scorpio, which is death in the tarot, and then my rising is Capricorn, so I'm death and the devil. Which I really didn't like when I was younger, but like I said, once we start to understand the intricacies, like even the devil card or the death card, I've got a skeleton with a person inside, right? Skeleton's ripping itself open, person inside's ripping itself open, because to me, it's very much transformation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also too like the way that you wrote high vibe and low vibe, because that's also kind of a similar way that I try to approach astrology too, where you give people a sense of like, you have a choice, you know, like there's some choice in there, you know, here's where things could get a little funky, you know, and a little, but here's where you can balance the energy out and you know, make it work for you much better, you know, as opposed from, look at.
People get really confused with tarot between, like, let's say you do read upright and reversals, and they're like, oh my God, I just pulled the same card you had randomly out of the deck. That's tarot. But, you know, like, if you're like, I know what this card means upright, but I don't know what it means reverse, it just means the opposite. No, it literally just means the energy of the upright is blocked.
Right.
A lot of the time. Like, that's a general way, right, of saying it. But like, it's causing so much confusion that I wanted to say that to people. And also the court cards, so confusing to people. Don't be confused. They are sides of yourself. Because sometimes I'm very quiet. I am very air sign. Other times I'm a fire sign, right? So there's sides of yourself as well as people around you. Right. And I want to ask you a question, actually, because I'm not trying to drag you down my path with me, but I go back and forth. I love to listen to or check out my horoscope for Scorpio and my rising and da-da-da-da-da. But sometimes, like, I'm not as fond as YouTube general readings for signs. Because I feel like with astrology, if I were to read your thing for Scorpio, you're actually looking at the planets for Scorpio. Now, it may not be specific to me, but it's where all Scorpios born, whether you're in the first decan or the second or the third, you know, this energy may affect you. I feel like when people do, it's not that I don't listen to them and think there's some great readers on YouTube. I do. But I think it's too easy for people. The reason I wrote the book so you can learn to do your own cards is I think it's too easy to go, oh, I'm going to find the reader who says he's coming back, or I'm getting the job, or everything's going my way. I'm not going to look at the reader who's doing Scorpio who says no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's your feeling on that stuff?
No, I think it's important to get an astrology reading that is tailored to who you are. You know, I think the general horoscopes are good for getting sort of like a general overview of what you can expect. But if you really are interested in finding out what's going to be coming up for you and you specifically, then that's when it's important to do a deep dive, either, you know, by learning your own chart, you know, and there's a lot of good.
Do you do orrery? I can't say this word for the life of me. I call it a whore chart. Do you do orrery charts? Orrery charts.
Horary. No, I don't.
Horary. Okay.
I do sometimes cast horary charts, which are basically a chart where you can ask like yes or no questions, or trying to like divine something in the moment, but I tend to do it more so for myself personally, as opposed to like doing it for clients. Just because
Gotcha.
sometimes, yeah, it's sometimes a little, I don't trust myself always to like read it to be like subjective with the horary chart, or
Let
especially
me throw
objective.
in, let me throw in too, like one of the biggest things I think with tarot, and you just said it yourself with astrology, right? Is if you're going to read for yourself and or other people, it's so important to kind of learn what your energy feels like, so that if you're going to read for someone else, you understand that you're not projecting your energy
That's
onto that
true. Yeah,
reading or this card reading.
absolutely.
Probably even more so with tarot cards, because it's so easy to go, oh, I am looking through my prism. I really love, it's like an exercise I do of putting myself aside, my ego desires aside, and kind of trying to look at a tarot reading as neutrally as possible.
Okay. Rachel, so we have questions. We have a lot of questions here that I definitely want to jump into.
I can talk to Mecca all day though. All right.
So the first question we have from AJ Jones, they want to know, has social media helped or hindered your career?
I suppose listen, it's just a tool like anything else, and depending on how one uses it, right? So I suppose it helps. I mean, I suppose it helps because I talk about this in the book. Like, I got sick, I had a major surgery. Whenever it's like, what happened to you? I'm like, well, I look better now than I ever did because I'm finally healthy. But it took me a while to get healthy. So having social media was helpful as far as people still being able to see me, I suppose. And for Mecca, I'm sure it's great, social media, right?
Yeah. A lot of people actually find me through like Instagram and Twitter. And I think that, to the point of like, being a Black woman in this space, I think the internet, the web, social media definitely has made me more accessible to the general public, because I'm not sure if people would have necessarily been able to find me in the weeds, so to speak. So
it's publicity for yourself, so it kind of can't hurt you unless you put up really terrible stuff,
right?
And because people always say to me, they're like, oh, you look so young for your age, and I'm like, I have a ring light. I'm putting up crappy pictures of myself.
Right. So let's see. We got another, actually a comment from Helena. Not a question, just a shout out. Totally bought your awesome books and decks, y'all. So thank you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Helena. Really appreciate it, because even me, it's when you think about tarot decks, there's not that many created by ethnic brown women that get, to be able to Barnes and Noble and big bookstores, as well as my Book Soup or the Strand or any indie bookstore as well. Like, I'm, it's a good position to be able to have that for me. It's not every Black woman who's afforded that.
Another question we have for you, Rachel, from Ebony. Thank you so much for creating a guidebook and deck. Just purchased this lovely gift for myself. Do you have any advice for setting up an altar?
Oh, I talk a little bit about it in the book, by the way, but thank you so much for your support. And FYI, the book is applicable to any Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It's not just for my deck, right? It's applicable to any 78 card Rider-Waite system. But the best thing I think to do is, do you have a favorite spot or a shelf? What's an area in your room? Because here's the thing, my books and your astrology work is a lot about energy work, right? So there's certain areas in my place that feel better than others. So for starters, I just go with the place that makes me feel good. And I say this in the book, it could be a little tiny sliver of a shelf, right? We see in a magazine that someone has like a $10,000 altar. No, you don't have to do any of that. Just set it up wherever you feel that there's space for it. I like to put a little cloth under, and I like to put special items too, like I have a horseshoe that I've had since I was 8, a metal horseshoe that I've dragged everywhere in all my different incarnations with me. I have a little tiny Scary Spice figure that probably came out of a cereal box in the mid 90s, so things that they aren't necessarily monetarily important, but because it's about how things make you feel. So set that altar up in a way that when you walk by, it makes you feel good and present. That's the whole point of an altar, right? Is to focus your energy. So I like to, by the way, take out if I were to pull a card of the day, I would put my card of the day up on that altar. I would leave that one card. So when I walk by that space, I'm kind of subconsciously forced to think about the energy of the card.
Yeah, no, just to piggyback on that, I would say when it comes to setting up altars, I agree with your point about like location. I actually use a little bit of Feng Shui when it comes to altars. So
Yeah.
like when it comes to like money and abundance, I'll put it in the left hand side of the left corner of the room. With love altars, I'll put them in the right corner because that, you know, according to Feng Shui, like that's where love is and that's where like money and abundance is.
Get a Feng Shui map off the
Yeah.
internet, people, because I do the same thing. Like this, the place I am now, finally, the love corner of the house is not in the goddamn toilet. Where
See?
it was in the house I own.
That makes so much
years.
sense. Yes, that makes so much sense. I remember someone had like a skeleton. I think they might have, she was a doctor, but she had like one of those like skeletons in her love corner, and it was like this is probably why love energy isn't flowing.
Right, but by the way, there are fixes. A friend of mine who was a Feng Shui guy came over and he put red tape around the water commode in the love corner of that old house. There were some fixes you can do. Google it again. My whole thing is though, if you have all the money in the world, go get all the paraphernalia you need. But if you don't, and you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're stressed out about what's going to happen, if we're even going to have cash currency in 6 months, who knows what is going on in the world? I think it's much more reasonable to like learn to do your own for the coming apocalypse.
Yes, I agree. Work with what you have. So the next question is from Cam. Cam is asking, who is tarot not for? I have a tendency towards anxiety and worry about that affecting readings.
Oh, well, listen, I personally, again, no doctor, right? There's some people who absolutely need meds for their anxiety, right? Like my dad did. And so there's that. Then there's a whole cross section, I think, of other people who we're spinning in anxiety because it's a super stressful world out there. So whoever asked that question, like, of course, I'm sure your anxiety is at a high fever pitch these days. But what I think tarot is exceptional at is teaching us new methods of self-soothing. Because honestly, for me, when I was spinning in anxiety and like could barely function, felt like I was having a nervous breakdown. It was twofold. One, it was my hormones. I needed to get those checked. And then two, I was in a habit of spinning in tarot and doing readings, sort of made me present. And I'm talking about me, not the person asking the question, but it made me present how much I indulged all day in it's not, I can't, it's not, in that lower vibration voice. And so I started, if I could give this person a little bit of advice, which is I get the spinning anxiety. One thing I know is when you ask yourself, has this ever helped me? Spinning and anxiety, like you start to go, well, not really. So it's about replacing some of that behavior with a more positive behavior that may or may not, be comfortable at first. But I do a lot of retraining the brain, by the way. I'm not trying to solve her problems for her, but when I notice I'm like, oh my God, this thing, I'm chewing on it. I go, oh, I'm doing that again. And then I literally picture myself sending the thought into outer space and replacing it with a more calming thought, which is I'm going to accomplish what I'm setting out to do or something like that. So I think it is becoming more present and sort of clocking for yourself how much of this anxiety is beyond my control and how much of this is habit inherited from the way my mom dealt with things, and this and that. And that's where tarot cards work exceptionally well in tandem with therapy. But I personally, I think anyone suffering from anxiety, like a tarot deck might be your best friend, because I've said this before in other lives, but we've all been the friend or we've been on the receiving end of someone who's like freaked out, right? And then they call us and they talk to us for 2 hours. But what tarot has helped Rachel with is calming down that spin. And now I don't call my friends until I do a reading and I'm a little clearer, because I understand that if I were to call Mecca up, Mecca maybe has a lot of her own things, the minutia of her own brain going on. I may not have space for me to so I love to utilize this as a tool so that when I do call someone up, I'm a lot more clear and I understand why I'm calling them, not just calling them to soothe my anxiety, because that's something I think is epidemic in America right now. So anything that you can do, whether it's go to therapy but I think the cards are going to help, especially if you actually look up the interpretations. If you're full of anxiety and you pull the devil card and drop the card and freak out, no, that's not going to help you.
Right.
But if you were to do a reading, I'm very big on spreads too. People keep just pulling cards and going, no. If the
we
not
actually had
no, but like if
had a
but for
question
new
about that.
readers. Go ahead.
No, so we actually had a question about that. Let me see. I just saw it. Someone was asking about what your favorite spread is.
Oh, I include a few in the book. I've got one of my own, a tarot spread, where one of the positions in it is this thing I want actually good for me? And I think that's a good question to ask, because
I love
girl,
that.
I've wanted so many people, places, and things that were not for my higher good.
Oh my
But
goodness.
you know what I'm saying? Even you, who knows, who can look at a chart and be like, it's full of red flags, and I'm still good. Anyway, because
Yes.
we're humans. But
Wait.
I have a spread in the book, and you can probably find it online too. It is called the Mother Peace spread. It is a modified Celtic cross, basically. It is round. It is fabulous. There's a million ways to read it. You get so much information from this spread. I break it down in detail in my book. They also have a Mother Peace workbook that I've had mine since the 90s. I'm sure they have a new version of it. Check it out.
I love it. I actually love the Mother Peace spread. I love
Yeah, don't you
the
love
round.
it?
Yeah.
Because there's the square pattern, the triangle pattern, there's the north, there's so much information. And I just want to say, like, if the cards, I have to find a better analogy than this, but I don't have one. Here's the anxiety card, by the way. And let me tell you something for the girl who asked the question before. The reason this card is designed like this, and I don't stress anymore when I get it, is it lets me know the worst that's going on is the spinning in my mind. The actuality of the situation isn't great, right? But probably it's not as bad as the spinning. That's going on. But I was going to say, if the cards are the car, learning a spread is the roadmap to getting you to understanding where you're going. Because I've seen a lot of people just pull cards and go, it means this. And I'm like, yeah, it does. But like, if you do a spread, like a Mother Peace, you go, oh, it means this, but it's right next to this card and it's in line with this. And the outcome is, and it gives you so much more information. And it really is like, it's a way to soothe yourself. Trust me.
Yeah. The cards are always telling a story, and it's just a matter of just kind of piecing together that story bit by bit. We got another question from Kaylee, who would love to hear more about the connections between astrology and tarot. Well, I can tell you that the only real overlap that I know of between astrology and tarot has a lot to do with the elements, like the suits, like with, for astrology, it's air, fire, water, earth, and you can find those same elements within tarot as well. And that, being that I'm an astrologer, and like when I do read tarot cards and I do come up with different suits, knowing what I know about astrology also helps me with interpreting certain things. So like, for example, if you get like discs or pentacles, like that's earth, cups are water,
Right.
the wands is related to fire, and the swords are air. So that helps me. So like when you were talking about like the anxiety, like if I pull swords cards, I know that it's usually my mind getting the better of me.
Right. As opposed to if you were to get a whole passel full of pentacles, you might go, oh shit, this is some stuff that isn't insurmountable, but it's on a practical level. I need to sort of, figure some stuff out. So not, oh shoot, but it's more like, that would tell you it's more money. That's what I meant. And who's not like, oh shoot, when it comes to like, oh.
Right.
That's wait, I have a question for you. I sent you my chart. Do you see anything kooky in it, or is it like a standard? Because I have a big triangle in the middle of my chart.
Hold on, let me see.
Oh, if you don't have it handy, I was just curious because I either sent her or a complete stranger my chart.
No. I have it here. I'm just looking at it.
My thing with people is you don't actually want to give away I don't think you should be giving away your birth time to everybody. People can kind of dig in your information. It's kind of like your social security number, people.
Right.
A little bit though, right?
It can be a little bit personal to read, especially if you're a Scorpio with a Cap rising who doesn't want to reveal her cards. So
well. That's what was hard about writing the essays, by the way, because I did have to be vulnerable, but I wanted to. I wanted to go, okay, my life, I'm so kind of me, myself, and and here's a way for me to start to begin to get out of my Scorpio shell.
No, but you know what? I think that that is so important and so key, especially right now while we're in Scorpio season, because I think in order for us to move forward, both collectively and personally, I think there is a lot that we need to do in terms around vulnerability, especially in terms of like the community building, the asking for the support, recognizing that we don't have to have it all together or have to have it, perfectly, all the answers, like those kinds of things. And I think it's really important to be able to sit um, in the discomfort or sometimes sit in that darkness, and still being able to like find your strength in it after knowing that, like, like kind of like, well, what's the worst that can possibly happen? Like I feel like that's kind of like a story that happens a lot with Scorpios, where it's like, yeah, this could kill me, but it probably won't. You know what I mean? Or like, yeah, this could kill me, but I've lived many lives before. Like there's this rebirth that happens,
Yeah.
that Scorpios teach us a lot, in terms of like, kind of, coming to that brink, but then learning that you can still survive, even after that, and even come back stronger. So yeah, that's a big deal.
I agree that most Scorpios do. We have that. We fall, but then we get up and usually rise higher.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that definitely is something that we all can kind of learn from and benefit from, especially right now while things feel so intense and like claustrophobic. It's kind of like, no, we've seen worse. You know what I mean? Like we've been here before. We can overcome and surmount
Well,
this.
you have such a good point, because a lot of young people hit me up and they're like, oh my God, oh my God. And maybe they haven't been here before. And you and I have not been here in this moment in history before, right? But our peoples and all our peoples have dealt with a lot of struggles along the way. This is a very specific, weird one, but that's why I think people are drawn to astrology or tarot or esoteric studies, because they're sort of realizing, I want to feel my seat of power. And there's something about these things that opens us up a little bit and makes us feel a little more, a hair more in control, right? As well as voting and doing those things. If I hear another person say, what's the point? They're all terrible. That's you giving up to me, because again, one thing I know about being Gen X is I thought I was raised knowing I had to get in the system to change it. Younger generations, you're so much more fortunate because you guys now know you can circumvent the system from outside. Whereas I think my age or older, we kind of had to get in there and then, do the changes. So what we want with either astrology or tarot cards is for you to feel empowered, even though we have such a weird situation going on in the government, right? Or weird things, or our president says stuff like, you ladies must be happy your husbands are getting back to work like it's 1942. We have to use our tools to empower ourselves, because let's not forget, in the craft, as our powers got stronger, our skirts got shorter, because ultimately witchcraft is a bit of an analogy for female power and our sexuality.
No, I agree. We have another question. I think this will probably be the last question, since we're coming close up on time. But the question is basically, when do you know, like, when to kind of like put the cards down, or like when you need a break, or when you should come to the cards? Because I know sometimes for me, like I find myself telling people like astrology is there to be a tool, but it's not there to be a crutch, for you, where you're constantly looking at the stars every single day before you make a decision, and just kind of abusing, the divination. So when do you, Rachel, feel like it might be time to kind of step away and then like come back?
Well, listen, I mean, my theory is, again, that's why, like, when people just keep throwing random cards, I'm like, I see why it's confusing and why you're confused by it. That's why I like a spread. And frankly, I don't do more. Personally, I wouldn't do more than 2 big 12 card, 13 card spreads in a day, unless, here's my caveat, it's in tandem and in conversation with the previous spread. Like, just did a big spread. I think I understand what it's saying. I think I see where it's going. I think I have an idea to shift it. You can ask another question in tandem. But the truth is, it's exactly what Mecca said. If you feel like there's anxiety because you can't make a move, because you don't know what the card said, or this or that, that's a sign to check in with yourself, because you're looking for external things to comfort you, right? And in this today's world, I get why we're all looking for external things to comfort us, but everyone's threshold is going to be different. I'm going to say this: use your intuition. If you throw a spread and you immediately want to throw another one because you don't like what it says, well, then you have your answer, right? Just like if you get an astrology reading you don't like, it kind of is what it is. But I would say keep looking at that reading you don't like to see, because there's always a tip in there for how to avoid the outcome you're looking for, which is kind of what I meant by, it clarifies the now. Yes, absolutely. It can divine the future, by the way, but you got to start at the beginning and just learn what these cards all mean. And honestly, I don't know if Mecca's like this, but like, I can read people without the cards. I don't need the cards anymore. That's why I wrote the book with the cards, because it took decades to get to that point. Well, not entirely. I was always a little psychic, but I'm saying like this is a tool to help open up your psychic energy. And that's just a sixth sense we all have. For those people, everyone here is probably into tarot and astrology, but there's one person who was dragged here by your friend. Listen, it's the same as when you walk in a room and you're like, the vibe is weird. That's all we're talking about, the energy. You've said that to yourself, and that doesn't make you a devil worshiper, does it? It just means you're picking up on the energy of things. Anyway, I babbled on so much, but I wanted to say, like, it was really kind of amazing for me to get to be in conversation with Mecca, because, again, she's a Black woman who is much younger than me, but the very youngest, I think, of my generation-ish, and has created and carved out this niche for herself, much like I did. When I first hit town, I just thought, oh, they're telling me to straighten my hair, they're telling me to do all this stuff, but I think I can just, no, if I keep going, with what I think my intuition says is right. So I've seen you really, like, between your book and everything you write for and huge columns, like, it's really impressive to see.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. People always want to know, like, how, I guess, like, how astrology can be used, sort of like as a tool for empowerment. And I really think that, these traditions, which have been around for ages, they've always been there to kind of help us essentially bring us back to ourselves, like essentially that's what it is. Because I think, we grew up in a society that's constantly telling us we're not enough. You're not enough. This is not enough. You need to do more. You need to be prettier, taller, shorter, skinnier, whatever. And I think that by looking at either your cards, which you're connecting to that inner voice, that intuition, looking at your chart, which is also a form of connecting to your inner voice, but it's also validating your presence here on this earth and saying, hey, you belong here. You need to be taking up space here. And when I think about that in context to, my own life and, how, I struggled to get to where I am, because there was a lot of, stuff and mixed messages and, things that kept telling me that I don't belong and that I shouldn't be here. And I was able to use astrology as that tool to validate myself. And so I do it now to help validate others. And so thank you so much, Rachel.
I wish we had another hour. Seriously,
I know.
It's really so fun talking to you.
I know. Yes, I know. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all the questions, but you can find Rachel. Where can they find you, Rachel?
I'm on Instagram at True Rachel True, so it's my last name and then my name, and then I'm on Twitter at Rachel True. Those are the main spots I hang out. I'm mostly, by the way, you Instagrammers, I'm on my Instagram stories so much more. I'm really fun on those, and then I don't talk about it often because I have a very small group of Patreon people that I do a little tarot lesson, but I don't do people's. I wrote the book so you could do your own readings, because I'm getting hit up for readings. I'm like, no, I'm not reading people.
You do the work.
Yeah. Thanks, girl. She just nailed it. Also, I'm too expensive.
There you go. There you go. But thanks so much to Bookshop, for hosting this event. Please, go, support Bookshop, support indie bookstores. And you can also find me, if you want to, at mylifecreated.com. Thank you guys again. This has been fun. Happy Scorpio season. Happy spooky season.
Thank you so much, bookshop.org. Seriously, huge fans of what you do. And I'm so thrilled that you hosted this.
Thanks all. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.